this is a beginning point. It's the beginning of the rest of my life. I got the meaning, and I got to write it down, because I don't want to forget it.
Just win, baby.
And welcome to the Gold Jacket Podcast. I am a proud member of the True North Fantasy Football Network. You can find them on Twitter at True North FFB. You can find us and all our content, video content on YouTube, TNFF Network. And you can find the website truenorthffb.com, where today we just dropped a make or break Daniel Jones article. So make sure to go over there and check that out for Daniel Jones owners. It is me, your host this week, Connor. You can find me on Twitter at Connor10. Jim is off for the week for work purposes, so he'll be back next week. But I scoured through the True North Fantasy Football chat to find one of my favorite AFC North fans, a suffering resident Bengals fan. You can find his work and name in articles with tags, and Kyle Yates over at Fantasy Pros is an ECR contributor. You can find his rankings over at the True North Fantasy site. And that is, of course, Ellis at @Ellis_FF on Twitter. What's up, Ellis?
Hey, man, I'm just stoked to be here, and I love that intro. I mean, you're making me sound real good, which I got to appreciate, except for that Bengals part. You know, but you're right, though. It's been kind of suffering, but hey, I'm looking optimistic. We're going to talk. We'll dig into it today. We'll figure it out. But no, man, I'm excited to break down the AFC North. It's a bummer Jim isn't here. And thanks for scouring the channel. I mean, it makes it sound like I wasn't your first option. I don't think I was, but no, it's okay. We'll live with it.
We do have a few like resident Steelers fans, and we got a couple fans of different AFC North teams, but you know what? This is going to be a good time. It's going to be a blast. It's good to get a different perspective within the division and stuff, especially the Bengals are a super interesting team. So that's going to make things even more fun to talk about. But first of all, we got to address the elephant in the room. This morning, I was actually driving in my car listening to Adam Shine on Mad Dog Sports Radio, and the news broke. Running back Cam Akers of the Los Angeles Rams tore his Achilles. Not his ACL, his Achilles. And we all know whenever we hear torn Achilles, that's bad news. And obviously they were expecting a massive year from Cam Akers in LA, and fantasy owners were expecting massive years as well. So first of all, I mean, what was your initial reaction to the Cam Akers news? For me personally, I never want to sit there and say, brag about an injury happening and being like, I told you about Darrell Henderson. Listen, I've been tweeting about Darrell Henderson a ton, but I never want an injury to be the reason that he gets to step into the role that he's going to get to step into. But what was your initial reaction to this? I own 0 Cam Akers shares, so I feel bad for everybody else, but it's a crappy situation.
Yeah, man. I mean, my first reaction was just like, it's sad. Right, like it really, and injuries happen and ACLs happen. Achilles is just a whole nother beast. So really, like my first thing, and I'm like you, I don't have any Akers, but it's just you got to feel for the guy, right? The kid's like what, 22, 23. I mean, that's like me getting hurt with an Achilles only playing at a professional level. Like he might be the same. Like it's just really unfortunate. That was the biggest thing for me. Regardless of what fan you are, you hate to see a prospect like that, go down in that fashion.
Definitely. Yeah. And one of our guests who we've had on a couple times, Edwin Porras, posted on, I think he's at FFB Injury Doc, I think is his Twitter tag. You can check it out. He posted something about Achilles injuries, and it's a super pessimistic outlook generally for people who tear their Achilles and try to return to action. So we hope the very best for Cam Akers, but I mean, obviously the injury discount will probably be in play next season. But let's just kind of talk briefly on, does Darrell Henderson suddenly become a potential 2021 league winner in your eyes? And does the value get any better to sell Darrell Henderson right now? Because I think the biggest thing is, as soon as that news dropped, Shregs broke the news that it looks like the Rams have every intention of keeping it inside, that they don't plan on signing any free agents. They don't plan on adding anybody. They're okay with Funk. They're okay with Xavier Jones, who they got last year, and they're okay with Darrell Henderson. So what's your initial value reaction on Darrell Henderson?
I mean, with Henderson and Akers, I think I kind of got the same response. And to me, it's sell for both of them. Before we move on from Akers, I was talking, I didn't see the post that you were talking about, but I was talking to my brother. He's a medical doctor up here in Canada. And I was like, what does this really mean for him? And so he did some research for me, and he found a couple of studies that were showing like after Achilles injuries, only 61% of players actually end up playing another NFL snap. But the kind of ironic thing, or the reason to be maybe optimistic when it comes to Akers, is that a lot of people who do tear their Achilles tend to be older, right? We did see Emmanuel Sanders bounce back, but that's about the only positive outlook that there has been. So we don't know exactly how. There's not enough stuff out there from like how a young player can bounce back. Unfortunately, we saw Donta Foreman, we saw Marlon Mack. Well, we're yet to see Marlon Mack. I believe they both had Achilles injuries too, so we'll see. But I think it's something. When you hear 61% even playing an NFL snap, that just to me sounds like get out. But it's sad because obviously he's such a great player, and I really hope it does work out for him. When it comes to Henderson, I don't think the hype's going to be any higher, right? People right now are going to be like, oh my God, he's going to be the workhorse. Like everyone was talking about, oh, what if one goes down? Who's like, look at how great they can be. Well, they're probably going to bring someone in. Apparently they want to keep it in-house, but really who do they have? They have a later drafted back, I'm pretty sure, and they got a couple special teams guys. You would think they have to bring in a back. I mean, sure, Miami didn't, but odds are they do. And even if they don't, they're probably going to want to spread the ball like they were before. And they might not be as good an offense without a guy like Cam Akers. So I think you just sell on the hype and, just see what you can get, especially in Dynasty and stuff. Like, yeah, you lose, but you can get enough value that honestly Henderson could be a top 5 RB right now. Like, say he finishes the season that way, and there's no way it's going to look like you lose that trade with his value.
Definitely. I mean, I kind of disagree in the way that, like, if you're going to sell Darrell Henderson, I think you have to sell if the opportunity's right. Don't sell cheap. Take advantage of this opportunity. This is a window where you can sell this guy and you could do good for your future. I picked up a Henderson share. I traded Amari Rodgers, a 2023 second and a 2022 third, because I have 3 of them. And and this was to a guy who's rebuilding, and he really liked Amari Rodgers. And then the picks are just stones because I'm contending in this league. So I think that this could be like Darrell Henderson can be a difference maker for some people who are contending, or for people who might be looking to win a championship this year or next. And Henderson, I don't remember for certain, but I think he might be 2 years out from getting a new contract as well. So you never know what happens when those contract times come as well. But for me, yeah, and Akers, I think you got to hold. I don't think you're ever going to get the value back for what you invested. And this is the reason I didn't have any Cam Akers shares. The investment in Cam Akers was steep. At the running back position, I think he was going as a top 10 RB, and I just don't know if I was prepared to pay that type of price for a guy who proved himself for like 4 to 6 games. So that was my issue with Cam Akers, that I was never going to be willing to pay that price, that premium price for just 4 games. And then you look at like a guy like Jalen Hurts, and people are paying a premium price for such just a limited time. And such a limited snaps. And I know that Akers struggled with injuries prior to this. So I think this only makes things worse and only creates a worse situation going forward. The fact that he had injuries, now he has this major injury. And now what can we expect when he comes back, and how will the healing process go? We can only keep an eye on that as the season goes on. But you did kind of allude to some of the people who might come in as free agents. Some names like a reunion with Todd Gurley come to mind. Adrian Peterson, the ageless wonder. Le'Veon Bell still out there. Frank Gore, another ageless wonder. Is there anybody who sticks out to you that they may go to, despite what the report from Shregs today?
Yeah, we were talking about it a bit before the show and everything. And, I think we got a couple different opinions on this. But I think to me, the one that jumps out is Todd Gurley. I mean, the reunion seems to make sense. Who knows what exactly happens? And this is kind of where our fantasy knowledge kind of hits a wall. We don't know exactly what's going on when it comes to like in-house stuff and how he left and everything. But the fact is he probably knows the system. Well, he does know the system. So that has to account for something. I don't know exactly how much that accounts for. And also last year, although it wasn't efficient and wasn't nice, he was kind of productive. Plus, his injuries really come from a bigger workload. Like the arthritis is when when you work too much and then it'll pop up. But, they're already looking at a timeshare. So they'd bring in a guy for a timeshare. So it's already a limited workload, which works to his advantage. Plus, he knows the system. He'd be the top guy for me on that list of who I would say might go there. The other guy, though, is I don't think AP fits it. I don't think he fits the bill. Bell, we haven't seen it in a long time. I think we've seen more from Gurley, in my opinion, than Bell in the last year. But it's Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson's a free agent. He's a wicked pass catcher. And, Henderson's pass catching just isn't necessarily there. I have seen nothing linking the two, so this is all just speculation. But I think from a pure football and skill set side, I think Duke Johnson has a really good chance at getting a contract here.
That's an interesting name because Duke Johnson is a really interesting name for sure because he is a very consistent guy. Like you look at his statistics, he's very consistent for his secondary role that he usually plays or third type role that he plays on most teams. But that's a name I didn't think of, but I didn't go digging into all the free agents. Those were just the names that come to mind. Does anyone on the depth chart stand out to you? I know. There's people who are talking about Xavier, and he was trending insanely on the on Sleeper today. To me, it's going to be a timeshare no matter what, and I think the timeshare leans in favor of Darrell Henderson no matter what. So, does Xavier Jones or Jake Funk stand out as a guy who's going to be able to do anything for you from a flex side of it or anything? I just don't know.
Yeah, no, to me, I'm not looking at either of them right now. Pick them up, of course, and see what happens in camp. We got camp starting up here, and maybe one impresses, but if they don't impress, and really based on their skill sets, I'm not super optimistic. They should probably bring someone in, and then it's basically luck of the draw who we think that is.
Definitely. No, I agree with that. I think that it's more going to lean towards Darrell Henderson, but I also think it means that it's going to lean towards more of a passing offense. And I think that's the biggest thing is that it's going to lean more passing than running. And I think that you're going to see that the run work drop a little bit from what we thought we were going to see if Cam Akers was part of that. And it must just be like an ironic agony that Malcolm Brown is gone and they could have kept Malcolm Brown around because he would have fit perfectly this role. And I think I saw someone on Twitter even talk about, well, how much could it really cost to get him back from Miami? I mean, you never know. But at this point, I think they keep it in-house or they go with a really cheap free agent a lot closer to the season. I don't think you're going to see anybody come out even in training camp. I think it's going to be later for any of these moves that might be made by this team. They're really going to take it slowly and see how things go in training camp and stuff. I think before we learn anything else or before any other options appear. Yeah. So I think I was also going to talk about recommendations to owners, but we already kind of talked about the recommendations, so that works. I'm more of the hold steady, see what happens kind of thing, especially with Cam Akers, and you're more of the sell approach. But we had to address the elephant in the room before we got into the AFC North. But now let's jump right into what we're all here for, and that is a camp visit with the AFC North. We're going to be talking Cincinnati Bengals. We are going to be talking the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Cleveland Browns. Let's start with quarterbacks, and let's start with the one that probably is most intriguing, mostly for the fact that he's going to be coming back from his own injury issues, and that's a torn ACL, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's coming back from major knee. I call it destruction because I don't think there's any better way to describe what that offensive line did to him. The Bengals did very little to address the situation up front, but have added to the young weapons at Burrow's disposal. So where do you stand on Burrow going forward in Dynasty?
I first of all, I just love the guy. I love everything we saw last year. I think he threw for over 300 in like, what was it, like 5 of his 7 games or something. Like it was something that a lot of rookies haven't done before. I forget the exact stat, but he looked legit. He looked like a leader on the field, and especially when you're looking at this point in time in their careers, that's a lot of stuff you want to see. I think that was like a part of the question marks that we saw with Josh Allen early in his career and stuff. Obviously, he turned it around and everything. Daniel Jones as well. I haven't seen a lot about their leadership skills and everything, whereas Justin Herbert, yep, apparently seems like a leader. And guess what? He's also crushing it too. I get that's narrative driven, but either way, it's something I like to see in a young guy, especially coming back from injury and having a team that's going to listen to him. Burrow definitely had a big say in when they got Chase. That was there's no other way to put it. As much as he says it wasn't his call, there's no way he didn't have a huge role to play in that. And then, so I'm looking for a big season. He's got the weapons. Our defense is terrible, right? We're looking for a high pass volume, lots of great weapons, a quarterback that has slung it in the past. Yeah, his TD ratio wasn't that, and percentage wasn't that high. I think he only averaged 1 TD, passing TD a game, if not less, last year, but he's a rookie. You know what? We get that second-year progression. We get a couple more weapons. You said we didn't do a lot to address our O-line. We can talk about it now with Joe Mixon. I actually think our O-line's looking a lot better than last year, at least. So I'm hoping that's the case. Really, if he is ready for week 1, they're going to make sure that he is good to go. He might not start till a little bit later, and I think that's totally fine too, because you know what? He's the franchise guy. So I don't think I'd pay the price where he's going right now in redrafts and stuff. And in Dynasty, I think he'll be fine. And to me, actually, I brought up Herbert. I think the Herbert Burrow thing is very interesting. I view them quite similarly, to be honest.
Yeah, and you can definitely view. I mean, I'm a guy. This is the Tua show that you have come on with the Gold Jacket podcast, because me and Jim love Tua, and I mean, I think that we can expect a big bounce back from Tua as well. And I think the debate will rage on to who will be the QB1 from this class, because if Tua can take off and if Burrow gets healthy and can take off, these two can both be really high-end quarterbacks in this league. I definitely have to admit that I underestimated Joe Burrow. I really like what he came in and what he did. And he did average a little over a touchdown a game. It was 13 touchdowns in 10 games. But yeah, the touchdown rate's not great. A 3% touchdown rate is not the best. But I mean, they have added, like you said, they added Jamar Chase. There's tons of workload to go around. When you look at it, he threw for 404 times in only 10 games that he was there. Yards per game was right around 270. So there's a good opportunity that this offense is going to continue to produce very similarly, throw the ball a lot, and that obviously rests on the arm of Joe Burrow. And we saw, and we're going to get into it later, the wide receivers. They had 3 wide receivers targeted 100 times, and they were one of 3 teams to have that, to be able to say they had that. Of course, one of them was AJ Green, who was absolutely atrocious with the 100 and I think it was 4 targets that he had. But Jamar Chase is definitely an upgrade over AJ Green. AJ Green had his days, he had his better days, but I think Jamar Chase is an upgrade over that. And I can't wait to talk about the wide receivers when we get down there. But I guess I'm kind of in the same boat for you. Burrow's dynasty ADP is sitting at 8, quarterback 8. Justin Herbert's is sitting at 6. So that is a discussion that will definitely rage on. Herbert, Burrow, and Tua, I think, will continue to rage on for many years out of this draft class. But Burrow's definitely exceeded my expectations, and it broke my heart to watch him go down. And I know that we had Edwin on a while ago, and he said he wasn't 100% certain if he would be ready for week 1. There was a lot of feeling that, like, Joe Burrow's kind of making things sound better than they actually are. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, but we know he'll be back at some point, and hopefully he's back and better than ever. And the offensive line hopefully is better, like you say, because if not, well, that will hurt Burrow in more than one way, definitely from a fantasy perspective. Next, we'll head over to Baltimore, and we're going to talk Lamar Jackson. He enters a crucial year number 4 as the Ravens quarterback, looking for a new big money contract. They've surrounded him with a bunch of new weapons to improve his pass game. Rashad Bateman, Teelan Wallace through the draft, and Sammy Watkins through free agency. He has had back-to-back top 10 fantasy seasons, back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. Do you think the Ravens will go to the air more with this new investment in the pass game? But does more air and less ground limit Jackson's upside, or do you think that it's actually better for Lamar Jackson for fantasy?
I personally think it's a lot better. I know there's a lot of hate around the fantasy community when it comes to his passing work. And yeah, trust me, some of his throws are pretty questionable at best. But however, I think his arm is better than people say. I always like going back to Matt Waldman when he came out as a rookie. Matt Waldman has a fantastic rookie profile on him. And it's basically saying people are underrating this guy's arm. He has a solid deep arm. He can get it done. And he's a better passer than people give him credit for. Now, they wanted this whole offseason, they were trying to give him weapons, right? They went for Juju, they went for Galladay, they went for everyone, but no good receiver wants to be on a team that doesn't pass. So what do? They draft what some people had as a top 3 prospect going into this draft, right? Rashad Bateman's a fantastic receiver. He really is. He's a great prospect. He's going to be fantastic to complement with Marquise Brown. And so we're going to really see, is Matt Waldman right? And does Lamar Jackson have that air ability? Because if he does, he starts opening up the field. We've seen his rushing. I mean, really, man, he's a cheat code that people are forgetting about being a cheat code. He should, I see a bounce back. I see him being a top 5 QB for sure. Something like that and people are taking your Kyler Murray's, your Josh Allen's. And, I think Josh Allen, I think he's ready for regression. Lamar Jackson, we saw that regression. I think he's ready to bounce back. So I'm still super optimistic on him and his fantasy outlook for this year and dynasty as a whole.
I mean, I think no matter what, if you take away anything from that run game, I think the guy's still going to run 100 times. He ran 176 and he ran about 150 last season. So, I mean, I don't see any type of mobility regression in that regard. Maybe he's not going to go for 1,000 yards. He might go for 800 yards instead. But no matter what, that's still going to put him tops in the league from a mobility standpoint. And everybody loves mobility. Everybody loves mobility in a quarterback. That's why Jalen Hurts is going as high as he's going, despite the Philadelphia Eagles not really generally sticking with quarterbacks for longer than a few years. For Lamar Jackson, like you said, he had that regression. He had a 9% touchdown rate in 2019, and that was 36 touchdowns. He regressed to around 7%, and that's 26 touchdowns, which does sound a lot more reasonable. And then you tag on all these different the mobility aspects and all the red zone work that he takes, because I think I was looking it up, and one of the things that if you're a Dobbins owner or Edwards owner, that you have to hate is that Lamar Jackson does take a lot of rushing away in the red zone too. He was I can't remember the exact number, but he was just over 30% of the Russian work or Russian red zone work in Baltimore last season. And that's something that you never want to hear about, especially if you're owning running backs in that system. But when you got a guy like Lamar Jackson, he's going to run the ball. If he doesn't see something, he's going to tuck it. He's going to run. But I think that is all for the better in his game, because I think that they're going to go to the air more, and going to the air more doesn't mean that it's going to take that much away from his mobility. That's going to take that much away from his rushing game. And he's currently going as a QB4, which definitely sounds reasonable. I think sometimes I'm skeptical. I kind of think that the price might be a little high, especially when you got guys going behind him, like, Dak Prescott, you got Justin Herbert there, you got Joe Burrow there, you got some of those other options that you may want to take, and you may want to go with a running back earlier on. So it's tough to say depending on what your value is for Lamar Jackson, but you are getting that cheat code of a player who's going to give you, I don't think we're going to see him go under 700 yards from a rushing perspective anytime soon. And if he continues to improve on his passing game, things are only going to get better for Lamar Jackson from a fantasy perspective. And there should be no reason to believe he won't drop at probably the top 8.
Yeah, man. And I actually, I'd be bold enough to say, I think you brought up a point of something we haven't even seen yet. And it is his rushing red zone work. He runs in the red zone, but he doesn't score touchdowns. And I wish I had the stat in front of me. I should have got it for this episode. But I know that if you take the average rushing attempts for quarterbacks and how many attempts per or touchdowns per attempts they have, Lamar would be walking out with 15, 20 rushing touchdowns. Instead, I don't even know if he's cracked 7, 8. Josh Allen's done that each of the last 3 years. So I think there's a world, I'm not calling it, But I think there's a world we see Lamar Jackson doing exactly what Lamar Jackson does, being great, and he pulls a Cam Newton and gets double-digit rushing touchdowns. And if that happens and he gets the weapons in the air, we could see him being the QB1 once again, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, over the last 3 seasons, he's at 5, 7, and 7 for total touchdowns, but I do believe that it was 3 red zone touchdowns last season.
So
But
that should go up. That could hit double digits quite easily.
If you have a passing game that really opens things up underneath, then Lamar Jackson might be able to go. They won't stack the box knowing that it's just Lamar Jackson and his legs or J.K. Dobbins. It may open things up if you have more reliable receiving weapons, which was a huge thing when they went and drafted Rashad Bateman. And when they drafted Thielen Wallace, not so much, but when they got Sammy Watkins as well, it makes these receivers that they were forcing to be receiver ones not necessarily have to be wide receiver ones. And Coach Craig says in the comments he runs in the red zone, but not inside the 5, which is true. But this could help open up even just enough field that he could get that inside the 5, inside the 10 work to get to, like you said, double-digit touchdowns, to break past 7, 8, 9 and get to 10 or 11 touchdowns. It's tough to say, and it sucks for Dobbins and Edwards owners, but only time will tell, especially going to the air more, if that opens the field up for them. Next team we're going to look at is a bit more of an ugly situation. The situation in the quarterback room is pretty bleak in Pittsburgh, as the future of Big Ben may be done after this season. Although there are rumors that he's on this ridiculous program, losing a lot of weight and getting into some really good shape for 2021. What are you doing with the Pittsburgh Steelers QB? I mean, if you want to say the other 2 QBs or 3 QBs that are there, we can talk about them. But what are you doing with them in Dynasty? Ben was 3rd among quarterbacks in pass attempts in 2020, one of 3 QBs to go over 600 attempts, but yet he ranked 17th in fantasy points at the position. Will the pace sustain despite their newfound commitment to a run game with Najee Harris?
Yeah, man. When we're talking the quarterbacks here, I can already hear everyone saying right now that I'm going to be biased when it comes to this, but I can't even begin to describe my disdain for Big Ben. I don't see him at fantasy. I don't see him in real life anymore. Like, he's coming off a massive surgery, the Tommy John surgery, which, takes a while to recover. So even if his arm, it doesn't even make sense that his arm would be much better than it is last year. He's immobile. He's running. He's not running because he doesn't run, but he's passing behind one of the worst O-lines in the league, and he doesn't move. He's literally a statue in the pocket. We saw his arm kind of go whack at the end of the year, right? Actually throughout the whole year. But I was like, you know what? I trust Mike Tomlin. And this team started 11-0 last year. They're going to be looking to win. Now, how are they winning? So I went and I looked at, the first 10 games, like when they were 10-0, like what did that look like from a Big Ben perspective? And what it looked like, especially when it comes to the deep targets, is garbage. I think he had, I got it right here. Yeah, he was 24th in deep target completion percentage, and only 43% of his deep targets were even deemed on target. He was missing his receivers, primarily Chase Claypool, but even James Washington has some big plays. He wasn't throwing the ball well. He didn't look great, and his completion percentage wasn't there. It was a lot of dink and dunk. And when you dink and dunk, sure, the O-line doesn't have to be amazing, but, he's going to have a lot of pressure on him because everyone knows that's the weakness. So if you're a contending team and you want QB depth in Dynasty, sure, throw a 3rd at him, throw a 4th at him. But I wouldn't be looking to touch him.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's only if you're contending that you want to have him, because he's going to be a guy who, that they're going to throw the ball a lot. So that no matter what, he's probably throwing 600 times again, despite their investment in Najee Harris. I don't think that changes the game in regards to throwing. Like you said, he had a bit of a noodle arm. He had, and maybe I think it's in, like, I've heard it a lot in baseball, the second year back from Tommy John surgery, so long as you don't, it doesn't react and that you don't re-inflame it and get things going. Usually the second year back's a lot better. So hopefully maybe Ben Roethlisberger has a better year this year. But I mean, either way, you're looking at 1, maybe 2 years left with the guy. And that's a really, really tough decision to make. Is it worth investing in the guy If you're contending, absolutely, like you said. Otherwise, not really. But the passing numbers are just too good not to look at. The attempts, the attempts in general. He had 600 the last 2 seasons. Obviously, he didn't finish 2019. He had 561 in 2017. So the attempts are there. It's just a matter of, can he even get a little extra? Because his intended air yards per attempt was like not even 7 this season. It was a really almost pathetic. And that was something that drove down the value of Juju and drove down the value of like Chase Claypool, like you said, because it's just overthrows or it's underthrows, it's throws behind. So hopefully he can clean the game up. But the attempts are there. Just a sheer amount of throwing is there. And that's what keeps the intrigue in Pittsburgh, especially if you're looking at receivers. And finally, we're going to look at Baker Mayfield, another quarterback who's in a huge year, big contract season. But for fantasy, what really are our expectations? He's yet to have a QB1 season as landed in the top 12. He's on a run-heavy offense. He's seemingly unable to connect with one of his biggest weapons in Odell Beckham Jr. when he's on the field, of course. He seems great as a QB2, maybe a 3, and he's a fun player to watch. So, but should we taper our expectations? He only managed 20 plus points in 6 games last season and less than 15 points in 6 games last season.
Yeah, man, I don't really know where the expectations are, but I think the highest expectation I have for him is to be Kirk Cousins. I think that's even a big ask. This team wants to run the rock. That's all, and they have the backs to do it too. Baker, we haven't seen it in fantasy, and that's just it. Yeah, he picked up towards the end of last year and he looked a bit better, but I look at the bigger sample size, and the bigger sample size shows that for fantasy he just doesn't get it done. He frankly, that's just not his MO. And so when we're talking about these kind of mediocre quarterbacks, a name that always comes to mind is like Derek Carr, and in my head, I'm taking Derek Carr way over Baker Mayfield all the time. And honestly, in Dynasty, I almost would think I'd rather do that too, even though with the age difference, right? That defense isn't good in Las Vegas. Derek Carr, he's been serviceable, and he's shown a bit bigger ceiling than Baker. Cleveland, they got one of the best defenses in the league, as much as it pains me to say that. They do. That defense is insane. And also their O-line. Like PFF grades their O-line as the best in the league. So we'll talk about Chubb and Hunt later, but I don't see the volume. I don't see the team behind him making him need to throw more than he should. Unlike we're talking Big Ben's attempts, we're talking Burrow's attempts. I mean, and then Lamar's an anomaly. But like he is, to me, hands down, it's him and Ben at the bottom of this division easily for next year, although they're going to win more games.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Like the run first mentality there with Kevin Stefanski is going to be what hurts Baker Mayfield as long as they have 2 running backs that they can reliably run with. And Jim would be proud to be on the show and hear you say that Derek Carr is mediocre, because Jim definitely is not necessarily the biggest Carr lover. But yeah, you're right in that regard. You nailed it. It really should be a guy that's in a more exciting offense. Like when you think Jarvis Landry and you think Odell Beckham Jr. and you think David Njoku and you think Austin Hooper, it's underwhelmed when you look at the names. And I understand OBJ went down with an injury, but let's remember when OBJ was in the lineup, Baker Mayfield was not hitting him. Baker Mayfield and him were unable to have any sort of connection. And then you had Higgins, and then you're bringing Schwartz into the picture. You got this offense that can be so fun, so high octane through the air when they can throw, but it seems like Baker Mayfield's almost holding them back. And that's why he's a decent football player. I wouldn't even go so far as say yeah, it's a big year for him, but how much are you really willing to pay this guy? He can't connect with OBJ. He can't make a connection with the guy you invested in to be your wide receiver number 1 for the future for him, and he's unable to connect with him. So I have my concerns with Baker Mayfield as well. And his dynasty ADP right now is sitting at QB 19. So, I mean, you can have him down there with Ryan Tannehill, Tua, and Carson Wentz, and all day, every day, I'm smashing those guys ahead of him. Like, it wouldn't even be close. Carson Wentz is behind him at 20, and I'd be going ahead with Carson Wentz over Baker Mayfield there. It's just a no-brainer to me. that Baker Mayfield he's a QB2 at best for you in a super flex league, maybe a QB3 if you go QB heavy at the beginning of a draft, but that's at very, very most for sure. But now favorite time, quarterbacks, we're talking gold, we're talking fool's gold. We'll take it with more of a focus towards this season, but also towards dynasty as overall. So which of these 4 quarterbacks or other quarterbacks, if there's some backups that you think might be gold, and which one's fool's gold?
Yeah, man. So if I'm answering this, to me, it's an easy, clear cut. There's 2 good quarterbacks, and there's 2 quarterbacks who I'm not excited about when it comes to fantasy. And so, Burrow should be my gold, but people are going to call me biased, so I'm going to take Lamar Jackson. And I get that's not necessarily a bold take. So I'm going to kind of jump it up a bit and say, I think he's a top 3 QB this year in redraft. I think he rushes just as much as he always does. I think that passing goes up. He has to be the goal for me, especially for where he's going. He's one of the few that has the ability to be the one overall, and he's going at QB what? You said 6'8". Like he's that good that he has to be my gold. When it comes to my fool's gold, I mean, it has to be Baker Mayfield because he's young. He has the weapons. He looked kind of like almost Sam Darnold got a bit of a resurgence when they went to Carolina, right? He has the weapons. They went and got him. They like him there. They have all this. But that's a lot of reasons to me that just glamour up. The fact is we have not seen a good fantasy production. And Darnold has the Gase issue if you want to go on that. Baker doesn't have that. Basically it's a lot of bedazzle when it comes to OBJ and Chubb and how good the team could be and the pieces. We haven't seen it for fantasy. I think all that is just shine. It's nothing real there.
Yeah, for me, my gold is Lamar Jackson. He's going as a QB4, but in a lot of leagues, you might even see him drop to 5 or 6, like you said. So you can get him with some really good value. Like it's debatable. Like I know people are in love with Kyler Murray and enamored with Kyle Murray, and there's people who are in love with Justin Herbert. But I don't think you get this dual threat ability, this true dual threat ability like Lamar Jackson out of anybody like that, even Kyler Murray. I mean, we saw some good things from Kyler Murray, but is that better than Lamar Jackson? Kyler Murray got a bit more of a passing game for himself in his first season, whereas we haven't necessarily seen a passing game from Lamar Jackson. So the passing game only brings the upside up more and more. So I agree with you on gold being Lamar Jackson. My fool's gold, I always like to look at ADP, and if they're going to disappoint the ADP, I think it's going to be Baker Mayfield, and I don't know if he's necessarily going to disappoint ADP. I think he might bring you right where he's at, where he's going, 19. I think he might be the QB 18, 19, 20, right around that ballpark, depending on some of the other people and their emergence. Like you see Tua, like Carson Wentz with his new environment. Matthew Stafford's going right near him as well. So Jared Goff, even like these types of environments, are they going to be enough to propel these people ahead of Baker Mayfield? And I think that Baker Mayfield will either land you right on spot on average or not, but he's going to give you a lot more volatility than most of these quarterbacks will. But that is our gold, and that is our fool's gold at the quarterback position. So let's move into the running back position. We'll start in Cincinnati again here. All signs point to a rocket flying to space for Joe Mixon this season. Gio is gone and out of the picture. The rumor is that Joe Mixon's never coming off the field. He will be more involved in the passing game. Mixon missed much of last season due to an injury, and then after that, we thought he was coming back, and he never came back. That was likely to protect him from the O-line that nearly destroyed Joe Burrow as well. Are you riding this rocket to the fantasy moon with Mixon, or could we see a return to the 2018 form?
Man, I want to think I'm riding this rocket with Mixon. I love him as a player, not as a person, but as a player. He is quite impressive, and he has a lot of talent. He has all the talent you need. The thing is that based on what everyone says when they talk about Mixon this year, you would think he's on a rocket, but his ADP, especially in redraft stuff, doesn't seem to reflect that. And in Dynasty, the owners want to capitalize and the managers want to capitalize and get as much as they can for him. But I find that people aren't necessarily willing to pay. So it's almost like this mentality that he's on a rocket ship because of everything you just said. But in practicality, he's going behind in redraft, let's say like your Austin Eckler's, your Najee Harris, both who I think are quite good. But if this is a rocket, he has to be going up with like Zeke at 5, at 6, because I think that's kind of where this rocket is pointing. The O-line I mentioned earlier, so I did some digging into it, and I think it's a lot better than it was. By no means is it good. I know PFF has us graded as us being the Bengals has them graded at 24th in the league heading to 2021. Obviously not great. I'm used to seeing us at 30, so this was a huge win for me. I was pretty stoked, right? And the other thing too is our O-line, half of them are returning and the other half are gone. We had Coach Craig in the comments talk about how Burrow pushed for Riley Reef, right? And really, he would have been he graded at a 71.4 on PFF, and that would have been the highest of our linemen last year. He had a resurgent season. He was actually quite good. We got Troy Hopkins, not Trent Williams, Jonah Williams and Trey Hopkins are coming back, right? And they were quite good for what they were doing. Jonah Williams is heading into his third year. It's just going to get better and better. He was our 11th overall pick back in the day in 2019. And the other thing we have is we went and we drafted Carmen. And the thing with Carmen is, yeah, he's a rookie, so we don't know exactly what that'll be like. But, if I'm a fantasy analyst, I don't pretend to be an O-line expert. The Bengals came out and said we're willing to draft him at 38 or whatever our pick was. And we traded down because we didn't like the looks of the other people and we thought we could get him, which we did at the end of the day. So if they had that much faith in him, our O-line is looking pretty, let's say better. let's say they're looking better than they were. So when it comes to Joe Mixon, there's a lot of mouths to feed. Without GOB, hopefully he gets more targets, and that's really where he can make that jump into top 7-5 RB territory for next season. And if he does that, I believe he's turning 25. Like, he is still quite young. And if we see that, he becomes where I think like Aaron Jones is this year, right? He enters, I would view him entering that tier for Dynasty where he's 25, 26 in his prime, putting up top 5 RB numbers. That's a big ask because the thing is we haven't seen it yet. And this is a lot of speculation. So it's kind of take your stance. And if you're buying into the upside and the usage, then I think you go for it. You pay what it is to get them and you hold. If you don't buy into it all, you sell and you just watch the show go on without him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of people who think that he's quite volatile, and we've been trying to get on this rocket with him for a while. So there's a lot of people who are just like, nah, I'm not going to buy into it, which is fine because when you disappoint 2-3 years and you don't bring what you're supposed to bring to the table, it's fine. But at his Dynasty ADP presently of RB17, like you said, this is a golden opportunity. He's not riding the rocket ship to the top like you would think, but he's clearly due for the RB1 workload. He's due for a huge workload. And he's going right in the ballpark of Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders. They're all right down there, right around the 20th running back going off the board. But I mean, if you look at Joe Mixon last year in the 6 games he played, everything was pointing to this. You look, he was at his most attempts per game. He was at 19.8 attempts per game, nearly 20. He had never been over 18 before last season. His receptions per game, 3.5. He had never been that high in his career. Everything was pointing to trending in this direction and that they wanted it to go that way, but it just wasn't able to. So, I mean, it was pretty easy to see that it was going to come and that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of, Joe Mixon has to stay healthy. Joe Mixon has to be healthy. But, I mean, what was disappointing was his yards per attempt were his lowest since his rookie season. His yards per game were down at 71.3. His yards per reception were the lowest of his career. There's those advanced things that were a lot lower, and he struggled until he hit that streak of 2 or 3 games where he got to play like the Jacksonville Jaguars and where he got to play some really easy run defenses, and he took full advantage of it. So the workload has to go up, and all these advanced categories have to continue to go up for Joe Mixon. But at the position you can get him at, you're getting a guy who's going to be an RB1 with almost nobody behind him. He's got Samaje Perine and Puka Williams essentially behind him, and neither of those guys are threatening the workload like you might see in Javonte Williams. I know everyone wants to crown him the starting running back in Denver, but Melvin Gordon's still around. It may not be this year that happens. Miles Sanders, because of his terrible play as a pass catcher last season, they went out and they got probably the best pass catching back in the draft in Kenneth Gainwell. So some of these guys have threats that Joe Mixon doesn't have for the foreseeable future. And that's what I like about Joe Mixon, especially where you can draft him. And he's on a brand new, really expensive contract. So obviously they're going to run him into the ground and not allow any team to get him after this second contract.
Absolutely, man. So I think the contract's a big part too, especially when in a dynasty. These second contract running backs are gold because as long as, some of them hit the wall, your David Johnson and stuff, but it's that locked in. They're committed. They're the guy. Whether they wheels fall off or not, they're getting every shot they can for it to maintain. So I think, and that's the same thing that goes for, last season we saw Jones get one this offseason too. Huge. Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, they're all in these big contracts. It's really a game changer in Dynasty.
Absolutely. That's why I always like to look. There's a lot of sites that have analysts who look just at contracts. And I like to look at contracts too, because those speak volumes, how much money, how much guaranteed money these guys have, how long they're going to be a part of that offense or a clear part of that team. So that's definitely a good point as well. Next up, we'll go to Baltimore, and here's where I have all the red zone information that I was alluding to earlier. So you got J.K. Dobbins, you got Gus Edwards, and then you have Lamar Jackson. Ingram's officially out of the picture, but the situation doesn't seem to be any better in Baltimore due to a QB who's taken 150-plus touches away from his running backs in back-to-back seasons, plus has taken 35% plus of the red zone rushing work in the last 2 seasons. Is Dobbins really worth the RB10 ADP investment that he is right now, which is ahead of Henry, Chubb, Zeke, Jones, Eckler, just to name a few? And then there's always Edwards. Who's eclipsed 150 touches in 1 of 3 years, but has had 700-plus yards in all 3 of those seasons and is currently going as the RB44. Could he be the value to own despite only having 4 games over 10 points last season, or are you buying into J.K. Dobbins?
Man, I love how you displayed that. You really set it out. And the fact is I'm buying into Gus Edwards. And as much as I love Dobbins, and I think he's a fantastic player, the defense is great. The team's great at running. There's a lot of stuff there you can get really excited about real quick when it comes to J.K. Dobbins. When you put him at RB10, and you're listing the names, like Nick Chubb, right? Neither of them pass catch. Give me Nick Chubb, though. We've seen it. We've seen him be efficient, and we've seen him get the work. We have yet to see that with Dobbins. Yet it has only been 1 year. But even if he gets the work, the pie is smaller with Lamar. So it shocks me to hear that Chubb is behind him. Henry, he can play the age card. Aaron Jones is another one I'm surprised is behind him too, because the fact is that Jones, as long as Rodgers is back, he could be top 5 the next 2 years. He's done it the last 2 years. So it's kind of the age is where the dynasty community does kind of differ on those. So I won't get too much into that. But Dobbins, the lack of pass catching does scare me. And the attempts, he was that efficient. So you'd think that even though the attempts aren't necessarily there, he'll be productive. But also, Gus Edwards has averaged over 5 a carry too. And I'm not saying that Gus Edwards is a bad back and that he looks good. No, I think they're both very good backs, but I think it's just the system. And the efficiency may maintain, but it's hard to put a lot of faith in. Mm-hmm. It's really, unless you have a back, like the aforementioned Jones or Kamara, where we've seen it over and over and over again, it's hard to bank on efficiency and then also minus the 150 attempts that Lamar Jackson has. I think RB10 is way too high. I love the prospect, but to me, it's more, I actually put him more if we're talking about youth, in the David Montgomery tier. We saw David Montgomery also have that ceiling, and we've seen him get the work. And so obviously Dobbins has a higher ceiling, but until we see more of it or we see them commit to him, I don't know how much higher I could go on him.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I would love to see Gus Edwards go to a different team because I think he's a great running back. I think he can be really good. I kind of I mean, I kind of compare a situation to Ronald Jones, except Ronald Jones gets a bit more work. He gets the 200 carries or right around the 200 carries, and he puts in the work. But those are two guys who I wish would get on teams where they would be appreciated as the Russian running backs that they need to be, as the ones who deserve to get the 200 carries, who can take the 250 carries, who can do that type of work. But Gus Edwards, unfortunately, is still in this situation. He is a value. He is still only under contract for one more year, I do believe, because they gave him the RFA tag. But otherwise, like, J.K. Dobbins for me is someone who I also like, as we talked about Cam Akers earlier in the show. I have had no shares of J.K. Dobbins. I just haven't been able to pull the trigger, knowing some of the running backs that are behind him or knowing some of the ones who are going behind him. When you're looking at a running back, like, you want efficiency, but you equally want opportunity. If you have a guy who's super efficient, but he's never going to get 200 carries, you might be stuck with a guy who's fringe 1,000 yards. And how many touchdowns is he really going to get when you look at Gus Edwards in the red zone? You look at Mark Andrews in the red zone, the add of Teelan Wallace, who's a really good red zone weapon, and then Lamar Jackson. There's just so many weapons. There's so many mouths to feed, and you just never know. Thank you, Coach Craig. It's a 2-year extension for Edwards. So Edwards is stuck in that situation. Dobbins is stuck in that situation, and the only one who benefits from the running game is Lamar Jackson, who's going to be a guy who probably outproduces the RB2 on the team and could be producing on par with the RB1 on the team, which begs the question, just go Lamar Jackson earlier. Go Lamar Jackson a couple rounds earlier, a round earlier, and leave J.K. Dobbins for somebody else. And then you can go and grab, I guess Derrick Henry's going ahead of him now. Derrick Henry's at 10, Dobbins 11, but then you can go ahead and go grab Nick Chubb or go grab Zeke, or go grab Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon. There's just a plethora of guys behind them that have a lot better opportunity and that have a lot better opportunity to hit their ceiling, which Dobbins is just not going to hit that ceiling, I don't think. But that's a Baltimore picture. Let's move on to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh should actually be able to be a pretty quick one because now it's Najee Harris. It's a draft capital versus a shitty offensive line debate. Are you buying into Najee Harris? The Steelers were dead last in running back fantasy scoring last season, 20th in 2019. They've yet to really establish much of a run game in the James Conner era, despite, they've tried to add all these pieces. You got guys, you got like Benny Snell, you got McFarland, you had all these guys that people were wanting to emerge that never emerged, it never became anything. Is Najee Harris the answer?
Yeah, man, it should be a quick one, but I've seen a lot of people that I respect have, especially in redraft, really be pumping Najee Harris up. And first of all, I want to talk about him as a human being because he is just an incredible dude. He looks like the nicest guy ever, and I absolutely love that. But when it comes to his team and his situation, it's ironic because what it reminds me of is Joe Mixon of old. We're having a guy here that should get the workload, even more so than Mixon has in the past. But he's getting the workload, and everyone, like the guys I respect, like Mike Tagliere has him top 10 because of it easy. Same with Justin Boone. He has him quite high too. Really the philosophy is that if you're getting the workload that he should get, only an X amount of backs that finish outside the top 10. And Harris has the ability to easily be top 10 and not be one of those few exceptions that gets the workload and finishes below. The thing that I'm worried about and why I think it's like Mixon is that O-line. That O-line is bad. And I know that's what everyone says, but I didn't even realize this until I was looking at PFF today. And I was like, when I was partying that the Bengals were 24th, I was partying because I saw the Steelers sitting there at 29th. That is the worst O-line they have had, I probably ever, because they've always had a good O-line. That is horrific. And when it comes to the run game, yes, I love Harris. Yes, he can pass catch. I already said my concerns for Ben. I am worried. There's a reason they couldn't run the rock last year too, even when Connor was healthy. And I think Connor's a very good back too. Yeah, he's injury history and this and that now. But I think this team, they're going to want to run it because of that defense. I don't think they have the line to do it. And like I said with Mixon before, the hype was there for the last 3 years because the usage should be there. But that O-line held him back. And I as much as we've seen so far, I've seen it on Twitter, but I don't think it's clear cut. I don't think you can say right now that Harris is a more talented back than Mixon. And so I'm tempering my expectations based on what I've already seen firsthand with a bad O-line and a good back and holding him down at my and he's RB15 in redraft for me. Dynasty could be great, but really that comes down to more the team. We don't know the quarterback in the future. We don't know what that team's going to look like. We don't know how they're going to play that O-line. So Dynasty is a little bit more tricky, and you can just buy into the guy and the talent. But definitely when it comes to his like immediate investment, I think he's getting a little bit blown out of proportion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that stance. I mean, I never thought of the Mixon situation and stuff. I mean, that is definitely a really good example of it. And for me, Najee Harris, he's going as a QB7 right now, going right behind Cam Akers, who was the RB6 and RB7. So ironically enough, that situation is there, and you're sitting there and you're like, please don't do that to Najee Harris. Please don't have that happen. So Najee, for me, I would redraft. That's tough because how long is it going to take him to get that offense going? And become a focal point of that offense. I mean, one would assume straight away week 1, but you never know. And yeah, can talent beat the offensive line? There's a chance it can beat the offensive line, but it is for me, I'm taking him where I can get him if the price is right, if the price is reasonable. But at that dynasty ADP, that is expensive. And I mean, you can pass and go and get some other guys who have a lot better situations with a lot less question marks, even for the future. Some of these guys have a lot less question marks. So that would be my thing with Najee as well. Final stop, the Cleveland Browns. The Browns ranked 5th in running back fantasy scoring in 2020. Nick Chubb is going as the RB12. Kareem Hunt is going as the RB24. Chubb was the RB11 last season, 9th if you go by average, because he did miss a couple games. He actually missed 4 games total. Hunt was the RB10, 22nd in average. Are people severely discounting Browns running backs? Hunt can be volatile, sure. Chubb has his injuries, sure, but they were both RB1s in 2020.
Yeah, man. All I got from that ranking right there is that Chubb is getting disrespected. I mean, here we have the PFF top-ranked O-line ahead of the Colts. That O-line is a brick wall. Meanwhile, you have the running back who is, I think, leading the league in 20-plus yard carries for each of the last 2 years. But he can break off these runs, and it's because he's also a brick wall, but he moves. Like, he is an absolute beast, and he might be the best runner of the ball in the league right now. And yes, I understand the league still has Derrick Henry, but the fact is that's how electric Nick Chubb is being with the ball in his hand. His yards per carry are unmatched. He has everything that shows a team that has a great defense, and he's exactly the back you'd want to have running the rock behind a great O-line. It really is a good football team. It's like the Steelers, where they have the great defense, but only their O-line's great. Like it really is. The Steelers are missing it. The Browns have it. And we've seen it with Chubb. I think Chubb at 12 in Dynasty ADP, I mean, he's young. He looks great. I'm shocked he's that low. And Harris is up at 7. I think that's just wild. When it comes to Hunt, though, man, we saw everyone was saying, right? Like, oh, what if Chubb goes down? Look at how Hunt's the best backup in the league. He's a very talented back. He's a terrible person, but he's a very talented back. And the thing is that we didn't see him explode once Chubb was down. He didn't show it. He has now become a change of pace fourth quarter grinder that is very good at what he does, but he isn't a lead back anymore. And so to me, I'm just out on Hunt. It's only I think it's another 2 years he signed. He's getting a bit up there in age too, and I'm all in on Chubb. He is one of the elite talents in the league right now on a team that is giving him everything that they can.
Yeah, 100% agree on those points that you make. Nick Chubb is an absolute monster, and the fact that he is somehow going as the RB 12 behind some of the people that he's going behind is crazy to me. Kareem Hunt, I mean, obviously the value's there. When Chubb's in the lineup, Hunt is able to do really good things. When Chubb's not in the lineup, Hunt isn't able to necessarily excel. But even when you look at the points per game average, you're looking at a running back who was 22nd in average. So even from an average standpoint, he's still at least an RB2, and Nick Chubb is an RB1, almost guaranteed RB1 for you, and you're getting him at just fringe RB1 price. Like Coach Craig points out, Nick Chubb is in a contract year as well, which is always big because you know that the man is probably due for a major payment if he's able to stay healthy. And if not, somebody else will pay this man, because like you said, Nick Chubb is a monster, but you're bound to, when you're running into walls, and he is a wall as well, that injuries are going to happen, and they're bound to happen, especially at the running back position. But when he's in the lineup for you, he is a league winner. And for their teams, for the Cleveland Browns, he is a really good, like, elite football player, elite running back. So we're at that time, running back gold, running back fool's gold.
All right, man. Once again, I don't want to side with the Bengals here because that's just going to sound biased. We're taking our gold. We're taking it based on that ADP, and it has to be Nick Chubb. For everything we just said, we just laid it out. He's just a stud, and that ADP is disrespectful, if anything. Mixon's also in contention at 17. That also sounds disrespectful, too. We're talking fool's gold, man. I hate to say it because I love the guy. I really like the guy. But it might be Harris just because of how high he's going up and the question marks behind that team. In Dynasty, we're not sure who the QB is going to be past this year. We don't even know if Ben still has it. We don't know what that O-line looks like. I love Tomlin. I think he's a very good coach. But there's a lot of holes to fix. So that would probably be my gold and fool's gold.
Love it. My goal definitely is going to be Nick Chubb, because if there's somebody who can outperform that ADP, I think it can be Nick Chubb. I know that he's on the tail end of the RB1, but if we go no injuries and Nick Chubb gets to go full steam ahead, well, it said it in those stats. He was ninth in average. I think he can be right around that 6 to 8 range from a running back perspective. If I'm looking at fool's gold, I'm going J.K. Dobbins. It's easy to pick Najee Harris. There's a lot of question marks, but I think the talent's there for Najee Harris. The opportunity is there for Najee Harris, whereas the talent's there for J.K. Dobbins. The opportunity is not there for J.K. Dobbins, which is what makes me a lot more skeptical about J.K. Dobbins. We'll move into the wide receivers, and we'll try and move through them a little bit quicker since we spend a little more time on a couple of the other positions. The Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals ranked 5th in targets to wide receivers. They were 15th from week 11 through 17 without Joe Burrow there. So there is tons and tons of wide receiver work available. Like I alluded to earlier in the episode, they're one of 3 teams to target 3 different wide receivers over 100 times. The ADPs currently look like this: Jamar Chase, wide receiver 8, T. Higgins, wide receiver 15, and Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 41. There was some Higgins fade early on, but it seems that the Higgins fade is kind of over. But the Boyd fade is real. Absolutely berserk. Boyd has over 100 targets in the last 3 straight seasons, 75 receptions in the last 3 straight seasons, and over 1,000 yards in 2 of those 3 seasons. I thought there was a fade on Higgins, and when I pulled that ADP, I realized there isn't really much of a fade going on with T. Higgins if he's still going as a wide receiver 2. But Tyler Boyd going that low is a massive value, but there's just so much work. I don't think people realize the astronomical amount of work. You missed Joe Burrow for 6 weeks, and yet there's this astronomical amount of work that was there for wide receivers with and without Joe Burrow. So imagine if even Joe Burrow misses the first couple weeks, like all that time with Joe Burrow, all that passing capability, all those attempts, there's a ton going that way at the wide receiver position. My point on them is Tyler Boyd is a massive value in my eyes. What are your thoughts on the wide receivers?
Yeah, man, absolutely. Boyd has to be the value. He's shown he's one of the best slot receivers in the league over and over again. And you're right. Now you add Burrow for healthy. I mean, people like to say, "Oh, look at what Dak could have done, and those receivers could have been if he didn't get hurt." I view it similar with Cincinnati, right? Like, what if Burrow was there and there was still this much work and this was still that good? So I think Boyd has to be the easy value. Now, if anyone's been watching my stuff or been seeing what I've been putting out, everyone knows I'm all aboard the Jamar Chase fandom. I think he's fantastic. I liked him before he even went to the Bengals, believe it or not. Not that that's a bold take, but I think he is that good of a player. However, WR8 is high. I was looking at Keep Trade Cut today. They have him at Dynasty WR6, and they have Devontae Adams at 7. Now, I love Chase, but you can't tell me you're getting that elite production or even the age and everything. If I could ship Chase right now for Adams straight up, and I'm a rebuilding team, I'd still do it because that top tier production, winning now is just as good as winning in the future. And the fact is Chase hasn't even played a snap, and Adams is Adams. Same with Nuke, same with AJ Brown, all these other guys. That's getting too high for me. I thought 12 was high, and that was kind of where I personally had him kind of in my dynasty rankings. I mean, redraft, I do have him at like a top 15 finish. And this kind of leads into my T. Higgins thing. Is the fact is even though there is a lot of volume, it's going to be tough for them to coexist. And I think if the dynasty community is so high on Chase that he's a top 8 receiver now before he steps on the field, I don't think Higgins can be 15. I think that's too high on Higgins. One of them is faulty. Whether that means you want to move Chase down to 12, 15 and then keep Higgins there, and then you have 2 guys in that 15 range, or you keep Chase at 8 and you double down on him being a stud. I don't think even with the volume, Higgins can be 15. I think just by nature of how it works in the NFL, he has to be in the 20s at best. So before we dive into Pittsburgh, though, I view that because they both have 3 receivers. I was doing a little bit of looking on, what does it take to have 3 receivers be fantasy relevant? So I did a feature on Fantasy Pros the other week about surprising players, and I was looking at the ECR for this year, and all 3 Pittsburgh receivers are in the top 32. And I was like, that was my surprise. I didn't understand that. So I looked at what does it take to have 3 receivers in the top 32. So really last year we had 2 teams that did it. We had the Panthers and we had Pittsburgh. Both of those teams threw for under 4,000 yards. Now that just sounds like an anomaly just saying that to you. And it makes sense because between the years of 2015 and 2019, only one team in the 4-year span had 3 top 32 receivers, and Drew Brees passed for 4,800 yards that season. It was the Saints in 2016, I believe. So really, once again, this goes to both teams. It's the volume needs to be there, and a lot has to go right to have 3 weapons. So I think it's all about finding, where do you take that stance?
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree with those points. And you look at the 5 people going after Jamar Chase, and the Dynasty ADP I'm pulling is on RotoViz, courtesy of FFPC. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore are the 5. That's just 5 of the names. If I were to continue down that list, we could have some very healthy discussion on should Jamar Chase be up there. I'm a strong proponent of if you're in a rookie draft, okay, this is a dynasty startup and you have a guy who has yet to touch the field, yet to take a snap, and he is going the biggest name that blows my mind there, DeAndre Hopkins. You are going ahead of an elite wide receiver with elite volume, with elite everything across the board. DeAndre Hopkins is a man who people lost their mind over when he was dealt from Houston into the situation that he's in now with Arizona and with Kyler Murray, where I'd have to look the numbers up, but the amount of time he's seen over 150 targets is absurd. And the thing with 100 target teams or having multiple 100 target guys, you don't generally have 150 target player at the top of that. So somebody has to take the beating a bit lower down. And I think that's probably like T. Higgins or Jamar Chase and T. Higgins split more friendly than people think they might. But at the end of the day, it's a super talented wide receiving room for sure. And that was the one that I wanted to take the most time on anyways, because it is the most intriguing room to talk about. Pittsburgh also was one of the teams last season that had 3 wide receivers targeted 100 plus times. They also had all 3 wide receivers finish wide receiver 2 or better. Juju finished wide receiver 16, to some people's surprise, because he actually was the best, finished the highest of all 3 of them, and currently has the cheapest ADP at wide receiver 28 in a contract year yet again. Johnson ranked 6th among wide receivers in targets. He had 144, so he's probably the closest example of what you're going to get to 150 with 3 wide receivers targeted 100 times. And then Claypool proved to be pretty boomer bust when he was playing. ADPs for them are wide receiver 22 for Chase Claypool, wide receiver 23 for Deontay Johnson. So what's your overall feelings for the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been that kind of trend throughout this, and it's not just because I hate the Steelers as a Bengals fan, but it's just where that organization's at right now. It's we don't know what's going to happen. We're talking dynasty. We don't know who that quarterback is. We don't know how they're going to fix that O-line. Really, there's a lot of issues when it comes to that, and that's why I think 22 and 23 is quite good for. I like those rankings a lot and that ADP when it comes to Claypool and Deontay. I think for dynasty, a lot of people are probably saying, "Oh, like I love Claypool, and I think he looks like an alpha. He looks like he can be that big body guy." And they use him in the red zone. He already has double-digit touchdowns. He has one season. He has double-digit touchdowns under his belt. Done. So I think he can be quite good. However, I don't think now is the time to buy. Now's the time to buy. If you're looking to buy, I think you see how the start of the year goes. I'm obviously not very optimistic on the Steelers. They play Buffalo week 1, too. That's a tough defense, and I think if we see that team not do too hot, you can buy pretty cheap on Chase Claypool and really look for that bounce back when it comes to the 2022 season and beyond, hopefully when they get a better quarterback. Deontay Johnson, the volume is there. It's safe.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been a huge Johnson fan, but he's proved me wrong back-to-back years now. And so I'll own that. But he's been quite good. He has a lot of drops, but you know what? With the volume and how they want to play that game, he's the guy. Juju kind of shares that too sometimes because we know Juju's good in the slot. And that's why Juju finished so high. So to me, it's kind of just an avoid all around. I think Johnson kind of has a premium on him because the volume was there and he had that good finish and good stretch of games last year. Plus, the people that have him tend to be the ones that picked him up or drafted him because he kind of came out of nowhere. However, I think Claypool is the one where you got to shoot for the upside. And I think come week 4, if they're not doing too hot, you can buy and you're just going to have to wait a year. And he looks great.
Yeah, I mean, the only one that I'd really be looking to draft out of that whole mess is Juju, and it's only because, Juju's 24, 25 years old, 5 years deep into the league, contract year, likely only signed 1 year because of the Ben Roethlisberger situation and how long he might be there, and that's the one who intrigues me the most. Saying Deontay Johnson's an amazing route runner. He is extremely skilled, but there's a lot of question marks that are going to start entering into the picture if Ben Roethlisberger does not decide to return the year after, because Dwayne Haskins, Mason Rudolph, it's an ugly situation at quarterback. And we've seen some of those guys like Mason Rudolph attempt to do it, and it did not work like it did with Ben Roethlisberger under center. So that'll be an interesting one to watch as the year goes on and as more comes out about Ben. Baltimore Ravens, their wide receivers ranked 31st in fantasy points in 2020, dead last in receptions, and the only wide receiving core in all of the NFL to have under 2,000 yards as a group. None of their wide receivers have an ADP in the top 24, so that kind of gives them a little bit of a value. Bateman's going at 29. Marquise Brown, who people seem to forget about, is at wide receiver 45. Do you think this wide receiving group is a huge opportunity or a potential trap?
It's a great question, and I think it is an opportunity. I think you're right saying it's singular because I only see one opportunity, and to me, it's Bateman. Who he reminds me of is A.J. Brown. Not necessarily play style and him just being an absolute monster on the field, but being a great prospect that a lot of people had high hopes for that went to a team that people were counting. You were saying he was dead because of it. Now I understand Tannehill came in out of nowhere and things went his way for A.J. Brown to become A.J. Brown right now. But the price right now on Bateman is not even close to what A.J. Brown was, even with the perspective of Marcus Mariota being under center. So I think he's the guy. I'm not interested in Hollywood. He's a big play, best ball guy. Don't really look too much at him. The other receivers, man, I like Boykin. He was a big body guy. I thought they could use a red zone guy. Obviously, nothing. I like Devin Duvernay. He's a speed guy. It turning into nothing. Tylan Wallace, same sort of thing. To me, it's Bateman or nothing. When it comes to the receiving core in this, at 29, it is a bit steep. You're drafting him in the top 32, obviously. And that's not like doing a startup. That sounds like you're drafting a starter on a guy that hasn't touched the field on a really kind of sketchy team when it comes to the passing game. But I think he's the one that he could prove everyone wrong. He could be a screaming value.
Yeah, no, I agree. When watching his tape, which I'm no professional scout, but I really liked some of the stuff that Rashad Bateman brought to the field. He was actually one of my favorite wide receivers in this class. and I kind of had to do the face palm reaction when he went to Baltimore, although there is a part of me that feels it's a really good opportunity. So I won't rule out that is still a good opportunity with some potential there. I find Marquise Brown to be maybe a value, although he did need a lot of touchdowns to get to the pointage that he got, even the average pointage that he got last season. So I'm really skeptical on Marquise Brown, but at wide receiver 45, when you start getting down there and looking at what you have to draft from, Marquise Brown could be that boomer bust guy that you just got to play based on matchups and stuff, and finding a really bad receiving defense and go after it and hope that he can boom for you and be a flex option periodically. Finally, the last team we're going to look at for wide receivers, the Cleveland Browns. This is the Jarvis Landry and OBJ experiment has been a mixed bag for the Browns over the last couple seasons, as we alluded to with Baker Mayfield. OBJ has struggled with injuries and to return to his early Giants day form. Landry is more of a wide receiver 1B in my eyes, and he needs to. The Browns need to give him a consistent wide receiver 1A. Browns wide receivers ranked 25th last season in points scored and had 6 different wide receivers as their top wide receiver throughout the season. They ranked 30th in targets to wide receivers. This seems like a really failed experiment, a failed pipe dream, and that Jarvis Landry and OBJ will probably soon be out the door and they'll be looking elsewhere. Jarvis Landry constantly jumped out to me as a value, but with behind the arm of Baker Mayfield, I'm starting to barely see a value there. And OBJ, man, I've been out on OBJ since early on, like since he moved to Cleveland. I've kind of been out on him. It seemed like a good opportunity. One of those opportunities where it's like, oh, he's getting dealt to Cleveland. And wow, there's a big boom. There was a huge inflation in his value, and it just seemed like the right time to move him. And so any shares that I did have, I did move. And I've never been able to pull the trigger on OBJ when I see some of the wide receivers that are on the board, or running backs or quarterbacks or basically any other position. There's so many names on the board, and I can never pull the trigger on OBJ. I think this experiment ends soon, and it's something to watch because OBJ not behind with Baker Mayfield under center could spell a bit of intrigue if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, man. And I think it's an ongoing trend. Again, I kind of brought it up with Pittsburgh. You know, my takes aren't really going to change when it comes to these teams, in the sense that, you know, I'm not high on these receivers either, and it has a lot to do with the situation, the team as a whole. It's a lot to do with my love for Nick Chubb and my disdain for Baker Mayfield. You know, OBJ, we haven't seen it yet. Jarvis Landry, even when OBJ is done, we haven't seen it yet. We've seen stuff from Higgins. We've seen stuff from Donovan Peoples-Jones. We've seen, like, it's for some reason it just can't be one receiver. Plus, they got 3 good tight ends in Harrison Bryant and Njoku and Hooper, which we'll talk about later. So it's one of those teams where it's almost kind of like the Baltimore, where the passing volume seems to be relatively low. Not Baltimore low, but they don't want to pass. And then on top of that, they do have a great run game. They do have a great defense. They don't want to pass. And then they have 5 talented weapons in the passing game. 6, if you want to start adding Kareem Hunt into it too. Mm-hmm. I am so far out on OBJ. You know, his points per game, it's been like WR35. We haven't even seen anything the last 2 years. We haven't seen anything from Landry. The only way I think I kind of go into OBJ when it comes to Dynasty is see how cheap you can get him, because he is kind of a value. And if you can get him at a kind of WR3-4 price, I mean, it is OBJ, for crying out loud. That's a fantastic value. The issue is there's a lot of owners. I know the one in my home league still sees the hype, and still wants the world for him because it's OBJ. So to me, it's see where that manager is at, and then from there, I think he's either buy or, you know, just let him go down with the ship. Jarvis Landry, just don't want any part of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that, and say for OBJ, yeah, definitely see what you can get. See if you can get him as a value. See if there's a frustrated enough owner who's willing to pull the trigger, because, you know, when he's on the field, there's a good chance that he could perform at least as a wide receiver 3. He can probably be in the top 36 for you, but that involves him staying on the field. And if the experiment ends and he gets to go to a better situation, who knows what could happen? Anything could happen for OBJ there. Fool's gold at the wide receiver position before we touch on the tight ends. My gold, and I'm going strictly based on ADP because the value just seems almost too real, is Tyler Boyd, because you're talking like when I talk gold, I'm talking ADP. I'm talking a guy who's going to beat that ADP, who has a good chance to blow that ADP out of the water. This guy strikes me as a guy who could eclipse top 36, top 32, and do what he's been doing: 75 receptions, 100 targets, get to 1,000 yards, near 1,000 yards, and be that safety blanket as a slot receiver for Joe Burrow. As far as fool's gold goes in this situation, I hate to do it, but I think it's going to be Jamar Chase for me. I don't think that Jamar Chase is going to come at least right off and be the guy. If you got him in rookie drafts, good. That's fine. The value's fine in a rookie draft. If you're getting him startups at wide receiver 8 and he hasn't touched the field yet, can't do it. Just can't do it.
I want to hate that take and I want to absolutely grill you on it, but you're right. At WR8, it's hard. It's just, you got to be logical at sometimes, and then the logic just isn't there for him at 8. I don't think he's fool's gold. I think he's legit. I think he's amazing, but it's just that ADP is so high. And so to kind of hedge myself and say, yeah, I think Chase is the guy from day one. I think he's going to be elite in this league. I'm going to say that my fool's gold is T. Higgins, because kind of as I mentioned before, I don't think they can coexist as high as that they are with their ADP. And I really want to lock in that Chase is the guy. And I think Higgins is still a very talented receiver. He had a great rookie season. But I'm thinking, WR15, I don't know if we'll be getting those kind of numbers, even with the volume and this and that. It seems like a lot to ask. And that's I kind of want to use that to show that, yeah, I know I am buying it on Chase. 8 is too high for my taste too, though. For my gold, it's tough. I actually don't know if I really see anyone in here that I think is gold. You're right on Tyler Boyd just because that ADP is so low. But I think my gold, not necessarily at his ADP right now, but if you can get, like I said, if you can get Claypool at a little bit cheaper price because that team isn't good this year and you're a rebuilding team, he had the makings. From my eyes, it looked like he had the makings to be a top receiver in this league. He's an athletic monster. He's Canadian, which is sweet. Not that has anything to do with it. But he was using the red zone. He had the double-digit touchdowns. Ben was a bad deep threat, and yet he was still getting these big games. He has to be my goal just based on what value you might be able to get for him.
I like it. Perfect. We'll move into tight ends, and as we come around the hour 20 corner, we'll try and keep it to less than 10 minutes on the tight ends. The biggest thing I want to point out for Cincinnati from a tight end perspective, there were 6 teams to target the tight end 75 times or less in 2020. The Bengals were that team. However, when early in the season, CJ Uzomah showed a lot of promise. He had 11 targets and a tight end, a touchdown in the first 2 games prior to his season-ending injury. And he actually ranked 5th among average fantasy points per game at tight end with 11.4. I almost think there's a hidden value with CJ Uzomah, especially when we talk about the sheer passing volume that's going to be there in Cincinnati. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's something that a lot of people aren't talking about and that a lot of people may not know about.
Man, I love it. That you stole everything right out of my mouth, man. I was going to give you a sneak peek and say that, Uzomah he's my gold for this class. I mean, because obviously really Andrews is the only one in this division to really have much value. But we're talking Uzomah, like you said, he looked pretty solid, and Burrow seemed to like him the first 2 games. Now, I'm not surprised that the Bengals were so low in targets to tight end, partly because Uzomah got injured, but also partly because we have 3 receivers now, and that's probably going to repeat. We're probably going to have 300 target receivers again next year. So he's definitely a value when it comes to just like, hey, you're in a deep tight end league, you're in maybe a tight end premier league, and you wait on tight ends, and you're hitting that bottom of it, and you're in some dynasty, and it's like him and Jared Cook, and that like you're talking Jimmy Graham, you're talking those guys. Yeah, I think why not? The volume's there, the offense should be potent. People don't really seem to think about what he did last year, and although small sample size, I definitely think there's reason for optimism, and that's why I'm going to jump ahead and call him my gold right off the bat.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Baltimore, quick look at Baltimore. Mark Andrews was a tight end 6 last season. He missed 2 games. So he was a tight end 4 in average per game in 8 of 16 games. So 50% of games, he eclipsed the 10-point mark. Obviously, he may be losing the allure after the big season where he eclipsed 200 fantasy points and averaged nearly 14 points per game. But I think that he remains a fairly steady option at a volatile position. And I think that he still has some value, especially when people are constantly looking for the next value pick like Logan Thomas or Robert Tonyan. He brings at this point, and based on Lamar Jackson in the passing game, he just brings steadiness to a volatile position.
Yeah, man, I think he's great. I really do. I think he's definitely one of the top end tight ends because we've seen it before, right? We not many tight ends we've seen a season like he had. Lamar clearly likes him, and I think a big part is also kind of linked to the Bateman side of things too. I don't know if they can coexist and both be very fantasy relevant, and my big part of that is it's going to be passing touchdowns. It's going to be getting Lamar to throw the touchdowns and have either one of them is going to have double digits and the other, I mean, I don't see a world where they both do, right? So, if Bateman just decides that he's only going to catch 3 to 5 touchdowns and Andrews gets 10 plus, clearly Andrews a top tier tight end once again, just like we saw. I could also see Bateman becoming just a really, really good quality receiver and say they both get 7. Then Bateman's probably going to be your better value because he'll be racking up more yards most likely. So a little bit more tentative on him, but I do think Andrews, people are forgetting. And once again, see what the managers think. If the manager still thinks he's a top 3 tight end, then he's dreaming. If the manager thinks, no, I actually don't know how I feel about him anymore, definitely worth a consideration.
Definitely. I love it. Pittsburgh, Eric Ebron was the top tight end in 15 of 16 games. So obviously he was pretty much the only tight end there. But the Steelers ranked 25th in fantasy points at the position. And he had over 10 points 8 times, but only over 15 points twice. The Steelers added Pat Freiermuth to the position as a young alternative. If I'm taking anybody out of that, it's going to be Pat Freiermuth, and you can probably get him at a ridiculously low value. But otherwise kind of staying away from the position because it's just being a part of a passing game that's going to be have a whole lot of question marks after this year if there's no Ben Roethlisberger in the picture.
Yeah, man, I got nothing on this one. I think it's just an absolute dumpster fire when it comes to the tight end. I don't like Pat Freiermuth as a prospect. I mean, who knows? Take your shot if you can get him for nothing. But, man, I remember when people were saying Vance McDonald's a top 7 tight end, and obviously that didn't come to fruition. Just out of it, I don't even think it's worth talking about when it comes to Pittsburgh tight ends.
Love it. And lastly, Cleveland. I just can't remember David Njoku. How about Austin Hooper? Harrison Bryant, who? The Browns ranked 9th in fantasy points at the position, yet they had no tight end finish in the top 20. That hurts. The Browns passing game with Mayfield at the helm has just been ouch for fantasy. It's something we've taken many shots at throughout this episode, and we're just not loving. Do you want any part of the Cleveland Browns and their seemingly really good tight end room, just not consistent as one person?
I do actually, which is quite surprising based on what I've been saying this whole time. And really the thing is that, I'm thinking that Njoku, I'm pretty sure he's on this contract. Let's see where he goes. He's a good prospect. He's shown some flashes. Get him for nothing, sit on him for a year, and just hope the situation gets better. Really, other than that, you're not looking at any of them for this year. Give me Uzama over all of them. And that's not even saying a lot. That's just how low the bar is for how this ball gets spread around and Baker's output. But give me the guy that all 3 of them are talented, and give me the guy that has the quickest way out. I believe that is Njoku. So I got some interest on him, but like I said, none of it's for next year. That's for sure.
I love it. You already dropped your gold, so that makes it a little bit easier. My gold is going to be Mark Andrews purely for the consistency standpoint. You can draft him around tight end 6, 7, 8, and you're probably going to get that type of production, and it's steady production based on Lamar's love for him and him being a target. And if he can get that allure back in the way of being a red zone target, and Lamar gets him the ball for 3 or 4 more touchdowns over what he did last year, suddenly he becomes even more intriguing. I don't think you're going to get the 200-point season again, but you can trust at least some consistency there at the position. Fool's gold for me is basically any Steeler. I mean, I know that you can basically get Ebron and Freiermuth for free, but it's ugly. Not just from a passing perspective, they love the wide receivers. There's going to be a focus on Najee Harris. I think the tight ends are going to almost be forgotten there. You can go and get them for free, but they're not going to provide you much from a value perspective at all this season. Who do you got for Fool's Gold?
Yeah, man, I think my fool's gold. I don't even know if it can be called fool's gold because I don't even think fools are thinking that this is gold. It's Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Their tight end situations are just garbage and it's a mess. I mean, sure, Cleveland has the talent, but we're not going to see the usage. We're not going to see the fantasy production. I'm just out. I don't even know if that's fool's gold or whatever you want to call it. Just no, thank you.
I love it, man. This has been awesome. It's been great catching up and getting the opportunity to talk shop about your favorite AFC North and your Cincinnati Bengals. Thank you all for listening and supporting. Make sure you rate, review, like, or subscribe wherever you listen or watch. Follow Jim at Gold Jacket QBs. He'll be back next week. We're going to be talking the AFC South. Follow me on Twitter at Connor10, and you can give Ellis a follow as well at @Ellis_FF. Anything you want to put out there that you're working on that people might be interested in checking out?
Yeah, man, I want to quickly, give you a big thanks of having me on here. I know I don't bring the beard that Jimmy quite does, but I like to think I got some good takes. I know, Jim, if you're listening, man, I appreciate you and all the work you do on this podcast too. And thanks to both of you for having me on and let me represent the TNF name. If something I've been working on right now, I've been working a lot on this piece that I'm hoping to release in the next few weeks that talks about domestic violence in the NFL when it comes to fantasy managers. And so, I really want to break down kind of how managers can approach it. Not just just what the bigger picture can be like. And I really don't want to be telling people what to do, but it's just an aspect of football I think it's lost in the sauce quite a bit. And, I think it's quite serious and something that needs to be brought up. So I really hope you look out for that. It should be coming up in the next month. And, it's been a big project of mine for over a year now. So hopefully it's good.
Wow, I love it. Definitely can't wait. Definitely going to be checking that out. And make sure you check out the True North Fantasy Football Crew wherever you can find them, at True North FFB on Twitter, TNFF Network on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, and TrueNorthFFB.com for all the written content and all our rankings and everything else. And otherwise, we're going to see you next Tuesday. We're going to be breaking down the AFC South.